My name is Adam Eberhardt. I'm director of Center for Strategic Studies at the Warsaw Enterprise Institute.
Who is going to win this war?
Well, I hope Ukraine and the free world will prevail and will win, but the war will be a difficult one, a long one. It will be a war of attrition, and Russia aims at destruction of Ukraine. Not only of Ukraine, the Russian goal is also to destroy the security order in Europe and as a result improve its position in a world system. But I very much hope the Western support for Ukraine will be strong enough, not only for Ukraine not to lose, but also to win eventually. But it will be a long war with huge casualties, and Ukraine will pay a very dramatic, a very high price for this war. That is for sure.
What, in your opinion, was our greatest act of political support?
Well, I think Polish support during the first phase of Russian aggression, the Russian invasion, was crucial, because it was a time when there were some mental barriers in Europe, and European policymakers were reluctant to cross all the red lines that were put on by Russian government. And Poland and Polish support for Ukraine during the first days of invasion was crucial. When Germany was discussing whether they are able to provide Ukraine with helmets, Poland was advocating for sending weapons. When Germans were more and more okay with weapons, we were stating that Ukraine needs tanks, modern tanks. And when Germans eventually accepted the tanks, we started to lobby aircrafts and some missiles that are able to have a long range. So it was important. It was the role of Poland at the first phase of war was to break all these mental barriers in heads of European policymakers who were afraid of Russia, who were afraid of bold, active policy of defending freedom of Europe.
What was the greatest obstacle that Poland faced in providing support?
What was the most difficult these days was getting acceptance from the mainstream of European Union. It is always a problem within European Union that there is a mainstream, so the policymakers, the countries involved are somehow reluctant to go beyond what is believed to be the right policy. And it was a challenge to create the coalition of the willing, coalition of the free world, of the countries which were more eager to engage, even though there were risks. We should not forget that Russia was trying to somehow frighten and to the countries of European Union to make them more reluctant, and Russian red lines were also linked to some threats on Poland, and one could have not expected at this time that Russia will not use some strikes on infrastructure of European Union, of NATO countries. So today we believe that it was somehow quite easy and obvious from the very beginning. No, it was not.
Did our European neighbors not anticipate this war?
The problem with anticipating this war was certainly the problem of understanding what is a logic behind Putin and his inner circle. Because experts and politicians, they tend to use their own rationality when predicting the future and when predicting the policy of other actors. The problem is that Russia and the Russian government, the Russian president and the Russian regime, they have their own rationality, they have their own way of understanding what are the needs. It is the way they perceive reality. Putin has been saying for many years that Russians and Ukrainians are one nation. He has been stating it for so many times that actually he started to believe in it. And it was a miscalculation of Russia. They truly believe they are able to conquer Ukraine within 3 days, and the Ukrainian question will be resolved in a way they believed. But it is about the policymakers, so they commit mistakes. Putin committed a grave mistake by invading Ukraine, but now he has to stick to the decision. He has to consolidate the people of Russia, his ruling elite, in a sacred war against the West. And this makes the long so long, and it is the reason why we as the West, and some policymakers, experts and others, we had a tendency to underestimate what is going to happen. And it is the problem of understanding that Russian regime is a criminal regime aiming at destroying a security system of Europe by any means.
What are Poland's obligations towards Ukraine?
Any country of Europe has moral obligations of supporting a peaceful country that was invaded by a brutal regime, but I prefer to use the term interest. Polish interest is to improve, or at least to keep the security of the region, and to make sure that Russia is unsuccessful in their attempt to demolish the European security order, and Ukraine in this sphere is certainly extremely important, because if Russia succeeded in Ukraine, there would have been a huge pressure on NATO and European Union. Let me just recall you a Russian memorandum that was put on the table back in December 2021, just 3 months before the full-scale invasion on Ukraine. It was a blackmail from Russia, and Putin, they were pressing on NATO to withdraw NATO forces from eastern flank of NATO. And we should not forget there are different goals. There is a goal to destroy Ukraine, but at the same time it is a goal to at least neutralize Central Europe and keep NATO and United States out of Europe.
What are your thoughts on the Western nations' increasing calls for a ceasefire?
You cannot have a ceasefire, you cannot have a peace with a predator that wants to kill you and is not interested in a deal. So any deal will be possible only after Russia is defeated on a battlefield, and after there is some internal collapse, internal crisis in Russia, and probably also departure of Vladimir Putin. Today, Russia would use any ceasefire as an opportunity to regroup, to refresh, and to strike back, to strike again. So we should be, while in case of Ukraine, a ceasefire might lead to an internal crisis, because Ukrainian society is not willing to accept any ceasefires, any agreements, any concessions on territorial issues, and a ceasefire would eventually lead to internal crisis in Ukraine. As far as Ukrainians are fighting, as far as Ukrainians are defending their state, the morale of Ukrainian society, Ukrainian army is strong. If we allow Russia to gain some time, Russia could get prepared and strike again. Take the example of Chechnya. Russia was humiliated during the First Chechen War, 1994-1996. They got a ceasefire, they have prepared themselves, and they strike back in 3 years' time, and they eventually won. So it is something we have to keep in mind. And one more thing, Putin is a politician not willing, not able to seek any compromises, because it is some kind of KGB and Russian mentality, which is about perceiving compromise as sign of weakness. And if they believe that Ukraine or the West are weak, and if they think that the West is looking for a compromise, it means they are weak. So if they are weak, it means they should be pressed harder, even harder. It is a challenge that the only road to peace is by defending Ukraine and by continuing with the war.
Is it sustainable for Poland to keep accepting Ukrainian refugees?
Poland should certainly help Ukrainian refugees, but we should also remember that this is something that is also beneficial for us, because first of all, it creates a social links between our two nations. It allows us to understand each other better, but there is also an economic factor behind. Poland is in deep demographic crisis. We need people who work. And if I was to say who is paying the price of Ukrainian refugees or immigrants living to Europe, it is mainly and mostly Ukraine. And it is a challenge from the point of view of Ukraine, not from the point of view of host countries like Poland and Germany.
What actions or policies by Poland have been the most contentious from Russia's perspective?
Something that was most annoying to Russia is that we in Poland managed to break all these mental barriers of the Western policymakers who were reluctant to help Ukraine. If not Poland and Polish policy back in February, March, April 2022, then Ukraine would not prevail and Russia would succeed. It is something Putin clearly remembers, and it is something Putin would like to take revenge for.